about reparations.
Yes.
So we've had lots of debates on the show about this whole issue. I have to admit, I come from a position, I don't see why people today should be compensated for sins against their ancestors, some cases centuries ago. Explain to me why I'm wrong.
Because it's not just about you. It's about the responsibility that you have as a citizen to the fate of your country. And whether you are an individual or a nation, you're not going to have the future you want if you don't clean up the past. You know.
So should I? Okay, but on that then, should I be claiming money back as someone in Britain from the Italians for what the Romans did, from the Normans for what they did, from the Vikings, for their forebears? Now, should I be claiming reparations from all of them? And if not, what's the difference?
I'll tell you what the difference is. There is no way that a modern Brit is being economically disadvantaged by something that the Vikings did. Well, I think it's been a long, long time.
You don't know. There might be people in the middle of Britain who are still suffering the appalling financial injury of what the Romans did to their family.
Slavery and trading in slaves was a universal institution almost from the dawn of time. So long before Europeans got into it, and the Portuguese were the first in the 1440s, in terms of trading in Africans. Although there was slavery, I mean, Bristol was a slave market in the medieval period. Irish slaves being traded to Norsemen, who then took them down the Volga to the Black Sea. So there's lots of slave trading around Europe, but also Africans were involved in trading other Africans as slaves to the Romans, and then to the Muslim Arabs. The Comanche, the Amerindian people who dwelt in the southwest of what's now the United States, according to one eminent historian, ran a vast slave economy in the 1700s. And then in the 1700s in Jamaica, when slaves escaped from the plantations and went into the forested interior, the mountainous interior of Jamaica, they were called Maroons. They often held slaves of their own. And I was in Raleigh, North Carolina in January, visiting my wife's family there, and I went to the Museum of the History of North Carolina, which told me that on the eve of the American Civil War in 1860, there were 30,000 freed slaves in the state of North Carolina, some of whom owned slaves of their own. And my point is, we have to accept the fact that for many people, even former slaves, owning slaves was acceptable or normal. And even if you might well, if you were in the 18th century, 19th century, you might well object to cruel and inhuman forms of slavery, and yet still think that slavery was a kind of a fact of life. So we just have to accept that and get our heads around it. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone until us was morally corrupt and morally insensitive. So that's one thing. So there was nothing exceptional about the British involvement in slavery in the 17th and 18th centuries. What was exceptional and extraordinary was that toward the end of the 18th century, partly because of Enlightenment views, mainly because of Christian views, the idea that owning other human beings as property began to be questioned on principle. And so in 1787, you get the creation of the Society for the Abolition of Slavery in England. I think Denmark was the first state in Europe to abolish the slave trade within its limited territories. Britain followed 3 years later, 1807. And then in 1833, the empire abolished slavery as an institution within its territories. So let me just make this clear, because at the moment, in recent years, we've been encouraged in Britain to look again at the horrors of slavery in which our ancestors were involved for 150, 200 years, as if nothing had changed. So the fact that Britain was among the first states in the history of the world to abolish the slave trade and then to abolish slavery. And it then led the world in suppressing both of those, as I said, from Brazil across Africa to Malaysia. That was extraordinary. No other state had done that before. No other states had done that before, certainly not in Africa, certainly not in Asia, nor among the indigenous peoples of North America. That was extraordinary. And we carried on doing that until the end of the empire in the 1960s. And in the 1820s and 30s, the slave trade department in the British Foreign Office was the largest unit. And in the 1830s or 40s, thereabouts, 13% of the total manpower of the Royal Navy was devoted to stopping slave ships leaving West Africa for the Americas, just stopping that, quite apart from stopping slavery elsewhere. So I do think we need to remember the fact that we couldn't undo what we'd done for 200 years worth of enslaving. All we could do was stop it and then try and stop it elsewhere.